happening, because I know that this topic is very emotive and people have very strong opinions on it right now. But on here, we're going to have that conversation in a much more rational way, and actually have people weigh up these arguments and decide for themselves, especially because what we're going to be talking about has actual policy consequences, looming in this country, given the conversation that the politicians themselves are having. Jonathon, I must begin with you, because really it was your piece that kicked this off. And maybe for the benefit of those who didn't read it, and I should have linked it in the descriptor, I'll do that after the show. Jonathon, what was your main argument here? You're obviously saying, hey, let's actually have these vaccine passports. Why?
Vaccination rates mean we might be back to a new normal soon, but vaccine hesitancy by sizable portions of the population could curb or delay us reaching herd immunity. And that will force us for a long time into tightened lockdowns with every new wave. Now, so my argument is essentially that vaccine passports, that is requiring people to show evidence of inoculation, is a path to liberty, and you can't really argue against this. Without these documents, our emergence into the new normal will be slow and hobbled, and governments will maintain their regulations. Making vaccines mandatory, on the other hand, I'm not in favor of that. But I do believe that making vaccine passports or showing evidence of double jabs is a path to liberty, and you can nudge people into having vaccines through this. The vaccination process needs to speed up for herd immunity to be achieved soon. And this is a public good. You can't doubt this. The efficacy of vaccines has been proven. It's a cost-effective approach to the pandemic. Rather than having many people take up ICU places, you can instead reduce the demand for this through vaccines. That's proven over and over. Vaccine passports are on the way, whether their opponents like it or not. This week, I received an invitation to a year-end function, and guess what? One has to email proof of having a vaccine. Perfectly reasonable for me. I want protection. They want protection. The vaccinated spread of the disease. The vaccinated spread the disease less than the vaccinated. That's proven. As a private organization, this company which invited me are perfectly entitled to insist on what effectively are covered passports. Perfectly reasonable to me. And I don't think the libertarians can raise a hue and cry over this, because it's a private organization. Since the introduction of vaccine passports in France in early August, people are now required to show these documents to get on a plane or train or enter a restaurant or bar. The day after the policy was announced, guess what? 1 million people signed up for vaccines, and higher vaccine rates have helped lower the number of COVID cases and people in hospital. This is proof of a public good and greater liberty and reduced harm to society that comes from vaccine passports. And in Italy, I read this week, civil servants must be double jabbed. And guess what? The vaccination centers were overrun after they introduced the new regulation. Vaccinations lower the risk of infection spreading the disease and crowding up hospitals and intensive care units. Jabs mean far fewer hospital admissions and therefore a vast saving of public resources. The idea of vaccine passports horrifies many libertarians who see government overstepping the mark and threatening civil liberties. And the idea that vaccine passports are a nudge to have the jab is viewed by some as tantamount to government forcibly injecting its citizens. To compare vaccine passports to apartheid-era passbooks is ludicrous. As vaccinations are free and easily available, there's no problem maintaining access to vaccines. Hence, the claim of exclusion on unfair grounds, discrimination, is not valid. Moreover, places to which the public are admitted have a right to refuse entry to individuals. Why is there not a sound protest to those vaccination certificates, which one must show at least a yellow fever jab to gain entry into most countries? And that has been the case for decades. The reason is that these are now accepted. and it's not controversial, and people realize the public good. You want a source of authority on this. The ultimate source of authority on questions such as these is the 19th century philosopher John Stuart Mill. There is a strong argument that Mill would have favored these vaccines based on the harm principle. On Liberty, Mill wrote, "The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. Not having a vaccine causes potential harm to others, as people are then at higher risk of infection with COVID, spreading the disease and pushing up use of scarce medical resources. Therefore, having to present a vaccine certificate to gain entry to crowded places is a public good and perfectly acceptable and reduces harm. Allowing the unvaccinated to entry to public gatherings would therefore pose a risk of harm to society." Some libertarians argue that vaccine passports are the start of a slippery slope to draconian intrusions in our daily lives. Well, are vaccination certificates that you must show at borders an intrusion? I argue that these vaccination passports will lead to the opening up of society. Pressure will be needed, but it will happen. The government's response to the pandemic has greatly threatened liberty with its curfews and restrictions on movements and activities, not all of which have been key to social distancing. One way of preventing governments from going down the slippery slope of infringing liberties would be through the introduction of vaccine passports. Vaccination passports are the way for these regulations to be dropped. The US is opening up to travel. Guess why? Guess why? The reason is vaccine passports. Vaccine passports are a path to liberty rather than a curb, and the libertarians should stand up and admit this. Thank you very much.